Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today, as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins Awakening, I'm going to take you through the build I recommend for Anders. This is my favorite version of Anders, carefree, enjoying himself, and also doing a great job helping the Grey Wardens. In this house, we don't talk about what happened to Anders in DA2. Before we get into the build, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much, and your support allows me to keep going. Joining as a member would help the channel a lot, but of course only do so if you want to and if you can afford it. I am always grateful, even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment. Back to the guide. First, I have a few mods I recommend. Most important in both Origins and Awakening, Dane's Fixes. It resolves a lot of bugs related to combat and implements missing item properties. It has some pretty nice quality of life and balance adjustments too, and it's completely modular, so you can only copy the parts of it you want and ignore the rest. If you use Dane's Fixes, I also recommend more detailed tooltips because it will show you detailed descriptions for all the abilities and items in the game. There is one more mod I recommend for combat, Advanced Tactics. This fixes issues with the follower AI and implements a bunch more options to choose from in the tactics menu. The extra options will help everyone, so you can set up more specific situations when to use abilities and items. And finally, I also recommend Rest Specification DAO that lets you respecialize your Warden and companions. In Awakening, you get access to a special item called Tome of Focus that you can buy, which respecializes a character, but it's good to have this mod if you want to respecialize your Warden from Origins before you import them into Awakening, in case you feel their build is not very good, especially in terms of being able to get through the first mission of the game. Tomes of Focus will only be available after you complete the first mission. Also, with a mod, you can choose to only partially respecialize a character, which means they get to keep their own specializations unlocked. This is good if you haven't yet played through Awakening because you won't have the new specializations unlocked, and if you use a Tome of Focus, you won't be able to choose that companion specialization until you unlock it for yourself. With that out of the way, let's get into the build for Anders. This will be a support-focused mage build that also has elemental damage and disabling effects, so it's more of a hybrid build than the classic support one I made for Win in Origins. This is inspired by the spells Anders has unlocked from the start and works on top of that foundation. When you recruit him, Anders has the following skills unlocked: 1 rank of Herbalism and Rune Crafting, improved combat tactics, and 1 rank of Clarity. Herbalism and Rune Crafting are nice skills if you like crafting. You will likely want one or both to be maxed out so you can craft high-tier potions or runes. Master Herbalism would be useful to craft a Master Lyrium potion for a special item Master Wade can forge for you, though Valana already starts with 2 points in Herbalism, so it's easier to max out Herbalism on her. You'll also need Rune Crafting to make Grand Master Flame and Lightning runes for the other 2 items Master Wade can forge, plus of course if you want some of the new higher tier or hybrid runes from Awakening. Combat Tactics is actually good for mages if you don't want to control them manually, because mages have a lot of different situations when they want to use their many spells. You'll need the extra tactic slots that this skill provides. Clarity is another great skill for mages that use mana to cast their spells, because it grants plus 25 mana per rank, so you'll want to put more points into this later. It's a bit weird that Anders doesn't have any points at all in combat training, because it helps mages to not get their spellcasting interrupted by enemy attacks. The rest of the skills make sense for Anders, though personally I'd have only given him Rune Crafting since Valana already has Herbalism, but that's nitpicking. Anders has the following starting spells and abilities. From the Arcane tree, he has Arcane Bolt and Arcane Shield. Arcane Bolt shoots a spirit damage bolt at a target. It has long range, a small cost, and short cooldown. This is a great spell for any mage since spirit damage is a solid damage type against most enemies. However, if you're focusing on other damage types or build archetypes, you can absolutely stop using Arcane Bolt if you think it doesn't provide enough value anymore. Like for example, if you have a lot of freezing, stunning, and paralyzing spells that help your team kill enemies faster and more comfortably. Arcane Shield is a sustained spell that increases the mage's defense. This is only useful if you are planning on your mage getting fairly close to enemies, like a Keeper or Arcane Warrior, and that's not the type of build Anders has. You'll usually stay quite far from enemies, so defense doesn't matter. If any enemies do get close, you can just use a disabling spell on them, but you do get access to 2 strong passives in this row by having Arcane Bolt and Arcane Shield unlocked, so I recommend keeping them even if they're not getting used. From the Primal tree, he has Winter's Grasp, Frost Weapons, and Cone of Cold. Winter's Grasp deals cold damage to a target and has a chance to freeze them. It's one of my favorite spells in the game, which I have unlocked on any mage regardless of their build, because disabling effects are that good. Plus, freezing makes the shattering combo possible if you hit a frozen enemy with Stone Fist or with a critical strike. But even without shattering, this is a cheap spell that does good damage and which stops an enemy from moving and attacking for a while. Frost Weapons is a weapon enchantment that enhances the damage of all melee companions by adding cold damage to their attacks. While cold damage isn't a great element, very few enemies are weak to it and undead are highly resistant and even immune, it's still a good spell to use for a bit of extra damage because it's cheap to sustain. Plus, the final two spells in this row are very nice because they freeze enemies. Cone of Cold hits enemies in a cone with cold damage and has a chance to freeze them. This is super useful, especially when you're fighting in a cramped area with a lot of melee enemies you need to disable. I like using this against werewolves, shrieks, any fast attacking or dangerous enemies. Do be careful when you aim this though, because you can also freeze your allies by accident. So I recommend using this manually to always have control over when and where exactly you cast it. From the creation tree, Heal and Heroic Offense. Heal restores the health of an ally for a good amount based on the caster's spell power. You can essentially reach 100% healing on the target when you have 150 spell power, but since you're going to use this when an ally is at about 50 to 60% health, you don't need to worry about having such high spell power. I always recommend having this on any mage, even if they're not a support. For Anders' build, this is one of his main spells that he'll use pretty much on cooldown, so it's perfect that he already has it unlocked. Heroic Offense increases an ally's attack for 20 seconds. The bonus is affected by spell power. In Awakening, none of your characters should have any issues with missing strikes. If they don't have a good attack score due to being poorly leveled by the game, you can always respecialize them with a Tome of Focus or the Respecification mod, so this spell is useless, but you want to keep it so that you can unlock the other spells in this row, particularly Haste. From the Spirit Tree, Walking Bomb and Mind Blast. Walking Bomb magically infects a target with a corrosive poison that deals spirit damage over the next 20 seconds. If the target dies while the effect is still active, it explodes, dealing physical damage to all nearby creatures. Your allies will also be damaged by this, but only 50% of the full damage. Shattering an enemy who has Walking Bomb active will detonate the bomb immediately. I usually don't use this spell, but it's great if a bunch of enemies are clustered together, especially if you can stun, freeze, or paralyze them so that they're stuck in place for the explosion. But it will be up to you if you want to use this with Anders or not, since he will have other great spells to deal damage with, so this one isn't necessary. You can remove it if you respecialize him, it doesn't matter for the build. Mind Blast stuns enemies in a sphere around the caster. This is an amazing defensive option to use when Anders is attacked in melee. Stun the enemies and run away to reset all your threat towards them. You can also use it offensively by going up to a large group of enemies to stun them in preparation for an AoE damage spell like Blizzard or Walking Bomb, or just to help your allies kill the enemies easier. From the Entropy Tree, Weakness, Paralyze, and Drain Life. Weakness inflicts penalties of -10 attack and defense to one target, possibly reducing its movement speed unless it passes a physical resistance check. Unfortunately, this isn't useful in Awakening since this debuff isn't that good against one single high-level target. The only times when this is useful is if you combine it with other enemy debuffs like Miasma, which reduces all nearby enemies' attack and defense, the Champion's Warcry, or in the case of Darkspawn, the weakens nearby Darkspawn effect on items if you have Dane's Fixes. If you have additional effects, then an extra 10-point penalty has more value. It's fine to keep this on your ability bar just in case you want to combine it like this, but it's not an integral part of this build, though it does give you access to Paralyze, which is one of the best spells in the game. Paralyze does what it says on the tin, paralyzes a target unless it passes a physical resistance check. As with any other spell that disables enemies, Paralyze is very strong. I recommend using this on enemy spellcasters and elite rogues because they likely have lower physical resistance, so they are more likely to be paralyzed. But you can also try your luck using this on other elites and bosses just in case they fail, since it would be amazing if they do. Drain Life deals spirit damage to a target and heals the caster for the same amount. It's super cheap and lets your support mage heal themselves without having to put heal or group heal on cooldown. And the spirit damage is a good element to have since so few enemies are resistant to it. Finally, Anders has the Spirit Healer specialization, which grants bonuses of +2 magic and +0.25 combat health regen from unlocking it. Magic bonuses are always great because they increase your spell power. The tiny health regen doesn't matter. Group Heal, Revival, and Life Ward are unlocked. Group Heal is a party-wide spell that restores a large amount of health to all party members. It's amazing, and I have it on at least one of my mages in pretty much every playthrough. It's best used when multiple allies are under 60 to 70% HP, or if one of your allies is very low and the others are at least a little hurt or heal is on cooldown. Revival resurrects allies in a small area, allowing them to rejoin the fight. It has a long 2-minute cooldown, so you'll likely only use it once in a fight. The revived ally or allies will be low on health, so make sure to use poultices or a healing spell to bring their HP back up, because otherwise they'll just get downed again. The revived allies will also have an injury from being knocked unconscious, so you'll have to cure it. Life Ward places a ward on an ally that lasts for 1 minute and automatically restores health to the character when their HP drops below 33%, consuming the ward. It's a useless spell if you're already using healing spells. You'll heal your allies if their HP is under 50 to 60% most of the time, so Life Ward will most likely expire before it can ever be triggered. So I don't recommend using this at all. The only reason you want to pick this up is that it allows you to unlock the final Spirit Healer spell Cleansing Aura, which saves you from having to use injury kits or travel back to headquarters to cure injuries. Moving on, Anders' starting gear is decent. He can be fine with most of his starting items if you don't want to spend a lot of money on upgrades. The spell he has are already powerful due to their effects, even if they could be improved further by more spell power. But I do recommend replacing his accessories and gloves. Magister's Staff is a tier 6 fire staff that grants +1 combat mana regen, +5 spell power, and +10% spirit damage. It's a good starting weapon due to the spell power and mana regen, but also because it deals fire damage with its auto attacks, which is very effective against Darkspawn and Undead. So you don't need to replace this unless you find a staff that is a significant upgrade. Tevinter Mage Robes are robes that grant +1 combat mana regen, +4% spell resistance, and +5 spell power. The spell power and mana regen makes these great. You can get a few better robes, but these are perfectly fine as is. Polar Gauntlets are tier 4 mage-restricted gloves that grant +10% cold damage. Cold spells are mostly used for the freeze effect, not so much for the damage, so improving cold damage isn't super important. I recommend replacing these with gloves that increase spirit or electricity damage, or if you want the extra cold damage, at least get some with a higher bonus. Magus War Boots are tier 7 mage-restricted boots that grant +12 defense. There aren't any options for mage boots in terms of offensive stats, so anything protective is fine, and these are perfect for the job. Magister's Cinch is a belt that reduces hostility and grants +10% to healing effects received. Unless you have Dane's Fixes, this belt will do absolutely nothing, because these two properties aren't properly implemented. If you have Dane's Fixes, it's a decent defensive belt, but you should replace it with a belt that increases your spell power. Fox's Pendant is Anders' unique companion item, an amulet that grants +3 willpower and +10% to healing effects received. Again, the healing effect bonus won't work unless you have Dane's Fixes. Even if it does, it's not really important since mages already heal themselves easily with spells and poultices due to high spell power. The willpower bonus is small, only adding +15 mana, so unfortunately Anders' unique amulet sucks and should be replaced unless you want to keep it for sentimental reasons. Hailstone is a ring that grants +5% cold damage. Again, cold damage bonuses aren't that important, but even so, a 5% bonus isn't significant enough, so replace this ring ASAP. Ring of Faith is a ring that grants +10% fire damage. It's weird Anders has this equipped because he has literally 0 fire spells, despite being shown using Flame Blast in the cutscene when you meet him. You can give this to Valana instead and get Anders a ring that actually affects his build. Moving on to the recommended attributes. These continue to be the same in most of my mage builds, 2 points into magic and 1 point into willpower whenever you level up. You can stop putting points into willpower at some point if you think you have a large enough mana pool, but personally I don't think there's such a thing as too much mana. Magic will allow you to unlock higher tier spells, especially the new ones from Awakening, and more importantly it increases your spell power, which affects the damage and effectiveness of all spells. As for willpower, you need quite a lot of mana to be able to cast all your active spells a bunch of times in combat. Yes, you can drink Lyrium potions, but having a big mana pool is far more comfortable since you don't have to keep checking if there are enough Lyrium potions in your inventory. Obviously, if you prefer spending money on crafting lyrium potions and using them frequently, you can skip the willpower, but that's not my personal recommendation. For recommended skills, I first and foremost recommend getting at least the first 2 ranks of combat training. They will allow Anders to take more damage before his spells get interrupted, and the second one also grants a permanent bonus of plus 0.5 mana regen. This will be useful to offset any mana regeneration penalties from sustained spells like haste, but also just in general to recover more mana during combat without drinking lyrium potions. The other 2 ranks of combat training aren't as useful other than for the spellcasting interruption protection. You can pick these up later after you max out the skills you care about, but they're not strictly necessary. The next skill I recommend focusing on is combat tactics. Pick up ranks 3 and 4 for a total of 4 more tactic slots. If you're going to manually control Anders often, then you don't need these. Only get them if you want to set up his tactics so he does his own thing without your input. You may want to max out either rune crafting or herbalism if you want to use these crafting skills. I recommend maxing out rune crafting because Valana already has improved herbalism, rank 2, when you recruit her, so there's no point in 2 different party members having the same crafting skill. You only need 1 character to be the crafter. Finally, once you have everything you need, dump all your other skill points into the Clarity skill. You get plus 25 mana per rank, and as I already said, a big mana pool is great. If you still have points after maxing out Clarity, max out combat training for a bit more protection against being interrupted when casting spells, and put points into Vitality, which grants plus 25 health per rank. Let's move on to the recommended abilities. From the Arcane Tree, unlock Staff Focus, Arcane Mastery, Fade Shield, Elemental Mastery, Attunement, and maybe Time Spiral. In essence, all my recommendations from the Arcane Tree are optional, though the Attunement passive gives you a huge bonus to magic, willpower, and mana regen, so I always unlock it on my mages in Awakening. Staff Focus is a passive that improves the damage of your staff's basic attacks by 33%. This would be good to unlock if you want Anders to deal a decent amount of damage with his staff basic attacks. But keep in mind that Anders mostly cares about healing and buffing his allies, as well as disabling enemies with freeze, stun, or paralyze effects, and he'll have actual spells to deal damage with, so this is not really a priority for the build, just like the final ability in this row. Arcane Mastery is a passive that grants plus 5 spell power. Extra spell power is always good, but it's a fairly small amount that is best kept for the late game after you've unlocked all the spells you need. It will increase the power and effectiveness of your spells though, so that's why I do recommend eventually getting around to it. Fade Shield is a passive that grants the mage plus 5% spell resistance and dodge chance. This also upgrades the Arcane Shield spell, adding 15% dodge chance and spell resistance while Arcane Shield is active, on top of its usual defense bonus. You don't really care about using Arcane Shield with this build, so the only reason you want this is to gain access to the next abilities in the row. Elemental Mastery is a sustained spell that grants the mage plus 15% to all elemental damage types. It does have a fairly high cost to sustain, 100 mana in reserve, plus 10% fatigue, but since it increases all elemental damage types, it's quite useful. As a support-focused build, Anders isn't required to use this, but since he does have spells that deal spirit, cold, and electricity damage, I do find this useful. Attunement is a passive that grants plus 10 magic, plus 10 willpower, and plus 2 combat mana regeneration. This is so good. You get more spell power from the magic, mana from the willpower, and of course the mana regen will offset most of the mana regen penalty of haste, 2 points out of 3. Even if you already have gear with mana regen, extra bonuses are always welcome so you can restore your mana faster. While this is just a passive bonus, I do recommend working towards this one fairly early because the power increase is significant. Time Spiral is an activated spell that resets all your active cooldowns for your spells, not including itself. It has a 2-minute cooldown, so you'll likely only use it once or twice in a fight, but it can save you if healing or defensive spells are on cooldown. It can also be used offensively to disable and damage a lot of enemies in quick succession. You could cast any combination of Paralyze, Winter's Grasp, Blizzard, Hand of Winter, Cone of Cold, possibly the AoE lightning spells Tempest or Chain Lightning, and then use Time Spiral to immediately make them available again. This is only a maybe because it works best when you're manually controlling the mage. There's no consistent way to set up your tactics to use Time Spiral. The best thing you could do is cast it when Anders' mana is under 40%, since at that point a bunch of his spells should be on cooldown. If you don't think you'll get a lot of value out of it, you can skip it. From the primal tree, unlock Blizzard, Lightning, Shock, Tempest, and Chain Lightning. I'll be honest with you, the main reason I'm including the Lightning row in Anders' build is because he makes a comment about wanting to strike fools with lightning, so I thought it would make sense for him. Valana has fire and earth spells, so it's neat for Anders to have the other two elements. The lightning spells aren't useless by any means. Electricity is a powerful element because few enemies are resistant to it, plus electricity damage also drains the stamina of non-mages, which is a nice bonus that makes those enemies have less power in combat. Blizzard summons an ice storm that deals cold damage to everyone in a targeted area and slows their movement speed, with a chance to freeze them or make them slip and fall if they fail a physical resistance check. Due to the slow and possible slip effect, I wouldn't use this if your party members are in the area unless they have a high physical resistance or are immune to slips, like a two-handed warrior with the Indomitable talent or a rogue with Strength of Stone. Still, this would be great to use at the beginning of a fight before your melee characters get there to deal damage and also slow or possibly freeze the enemies. Lightning deals electricity damage to one enemy. This is a great single target spell because it's fairly cheap, it does a good amount of damage, and the element is good, plus it drains stamina from non-mages. Shock damages enemies in a cone in front of you with electricity damage. I recommend using Cone of Cold or Hand of Winter over this since they also freeze, but you could also use Shock after one of these spells to damage the frozen characters. Tempest summons a lightning storm that deals electricity damage to all creatures in an area. If you're fighting enemies that are resistant to cold and want to deal area damage, this is good, though it will also damage your other party members and drain their stamina if they're warriors or rogues, so do be careful with that. If you want a great electricity spell that deals damage in an area, the final spell in this row is best. Chain Lightning fires a lightning bolt that deals electricity damage to one initial target, then forks to damage nearby enemies, and forks once more to deal damage again. If there are lots of creatures clustered together, this spell can do a ton of damage. With 3 or less targets, it's not really worth it because it has a conjuration time of 2 seconds, so it's possible they won't be in the same position when the spell releases. It's best to use this on frozen, stunned, or otherwise immobilized enemies, since you know they won't move for a few seconds. So you can pair this with Blizzard, Cone of Cold, Hand of Winter, or even Mind Blast for great effect. The best part about Chain Lightning is that it actually doesn't damage your party members at all, despite the spell's description mentioning that friendly fire is possible. So this is one of the safest AoE damaging spells to cast, together with a Battle Mage's Hand of Winter. From the Creation Tree, unlock Rejuvenate, Heroic Aura, Heroic Defense, and Haste. Rejuvenate grants an ally a boost of +8 to their mana or stamina regeneration for 10 seconds. This can be especially useful if you have a party member with a sustained ability that has a huge mana or stamina regeneration penalty, like an Arcane Warrior using Shimmering Shield, or a melee rogue using Shadow Form. If you have certain items from Origins that grant large bonuses to mana or stamina regeneration, then you may not need this, but Rejuvenate can still be useful to help a melee damager that uses a lot of activated abilities. Yes, you have stamina drafts in Awakening that restore stamina, but Anders is already a support mage, so he might as well have this for extra utility. If you don't like it or don't feel like you need it, you can skip it. Heroic Aura increases an ally's missile deflection score by 30 points for 20 seconds, with no further bonuses based on spell power. This is only good if you're in a fight against a lot of archers, and you should cast it on the party's tank. But in Awakening, there aren't that many encounters against multiple archers, so it's kind of useless and you only want it because you're working towards unlocking Haste. Heroic Defense grants an ally bonuses to defense, physical resistance, and all elemental resistances for 20 seconds, but also gives them a 5% fatigue penalty. These bonuses are affected by spell power. This is amazing for a tank, especially in fights against enemies that deal elemental damage, like spellcasters, the Inferno Golem, Darkspawn Childers, Shrieks, Dragons, Demons, and so on. You can also cast this on your tank or melee damager if you want to cast an AoE damage spell like Blizzard or Tempest in the area where your ally is, so they're at least a little protected against the friendly fire. Haste is a sustained spell that increases the movement speed and attack speed of the entire party, while having a -5 attack penalty for the team and a -3 combat mana regeneration penalty for the caster. It's a bit bugged in regards to aim speed in the vanilla game, but Dane's Fixes takes care of it. The only thing to keep in mind is that mana regen penalty, but you'll easily be able to offset it with bonuses from abilities and items. From the Spirit Healer tree, optionally unlock Cleansing Aura. Cleansing Aura is a sustained spell that restores health every few seconds to allies within 10 meters of the caster, as well as curing allies within 5 meters of the caster of any injuries. Allies further than 5 meters away will not have injuries cured, and the heal will be decreased by distance. This mode has a mana regeneration penalty of -10, but you only really need to use it for a few seconds to cure your allies' injuries. The reason this is optional is that you're only using it as a replacement for injury kits, or instead of traveling back to Vigil's Keep, so its value isn't very high, especially if your characters don't get knocked unconscious often. And with a healer like Anders, they shouldn't have much trouble staying alive. If you decide that you don't need Cleansing Aura, then you could respecialize Anders and also remove the point he has in Life Ward, since that spell is useless other than if you want Cleansing Aura. The only other specialization I recommend for Anders is the Battle Mage. While it's mostly focused on short range and aura spells, the Battle Mage has one particular spell that's absolutely worth getting: Hand of Winter. The bonuses you get from choosing Battle Mage are +2 magic and plus 0.25 combat health regeneration. The magic bonus is great, the health regen is tiny and doesn't matter. Regardless, you mainly want to unlock the first 2 spells from here and optionally the third ability. Draining Aura is a sustained that deals spirit damage to all enemies in the sphere around the mage, and also heals the caster for some of the damage dealt. The damage bursts happen every 4 seconds, and whenever an enemy is damaged, 30 mana is drained from the caster, unaffected by fatigue. I wouldn't use this on Anders because most of the time he will stay pretty far from enemies. If you decide to manually control him and get closer to the action to use stuff like Cone of Cold, Shock, Mind Blast, or maybe Hand of Winter offensively, then you can activate Draining Aura during these times as well for some extra spirit damage. But keep an eye on Anders' mana so it doesn't accidentally drain to 0, since if it gets to 0, it will deactivate any sustained spells he has active, like Haste, Frost Weapons, and Elemental Mastery. Mostly you just want this so you have access to the second spell. Hand of Winter deals cold damage to all enemies in a 7.5 meter radius around the mage, freezing the targets if they fail a physical resistance check. The damage scales with spell power, and the base freeze duration is a huge 10 seconds, adjusted by enemy rank, but it's still a lot, though bosses can't be frozen. As with all other cold spells, this can enable the Shattering combo on elite or lower rank enemies, and disabling enemies in general is strong. You can use this defensively to protect Anders from enemies attacking him in melee, or offensively by going close to an enemy group to freeze them, after which you can cast more AoE damaging spells, or just let your other party members kill those enemies. Hand of Winter is one of my favorite spells from Awakening, and I 100% recommend picking it up early after you unlock Haste. Optionally, you could also unlock the Stoic passive, which restores some of the mage's mana whenever they get damaged. The mana restored is equal to 50% of the damage taken. Due to the fact that Anders is a support, he shouldn't get targeted by enemies much, so you won't get a lot of mana from this. But it could help a little every once in a while, so if you've unlocked everything else you need, you can pick this up in the late game. I don't recommend any third specialization for this build, because Anders doesn't need any of the specialization spells or abilities to be a good support. If you want to, you can unlock a specialization just to get the passive bonus from it. The best passive bonuses from specializations would be from the Keeper, +2 magic and +3 mental resistance, or from the Blood Mage, +2 spell power and +2 constitution. But since Anders won't use this final specialization, just pick whichever one you want, or none at all. The bonuses are tiny, so they won't affect the power of your build visibly. Moving on to the recommended gear. As part of recommending items for Awakening, I'll only recommend items you can obtain in Awakening. If you have a strong item from importing your Origins Warden, you can use it if it has good stats similar to what I recommend, but I can't recommend DAO items because you don't always import your Warden, and even if you do, it's not guaranteed you'll have those items in your inventory. I may mention an item from DAO here and there if I think it would be particularly nice, or if Awakening doesn't have enough good options. But otherwise, you'll have to figure out for yourself if an item from Origins is good. To make that easier, I'll explain the main bonuses to look for. On staves, you want spell power, then mana regeneration, willpower, and various elemental damage bonuses. But spell power is the most important. You should also keep in mind that each staff has a certain damage type for its basic attacks, physical or elemental. You may prefer a certain element to deal extra damage to enemies that are weak to that element, or avoid using an element they're highly resistant to. Like for example, in the fight against the Queen of the Black Marsh, I don't recommend using a lightning staff because she's highly resistant to electricity damage. For armor, the good offensive bonuses are magic, spell power, and possibly an elemental damage bonus. The good utility bonuses are mana regeneration and mana or willpower. You don't care about defensive stats because you're mostly staying at range and should also be protected by a tank, plus you can use disabling spells on any enemies that come close, so you're very safe. Defense, armor, and dodge chance are what's decent. For accessories, the same stats from the other item types are useful, especially the offensive ones. Some accessories have bonuses to all attributes, which can be decent, but for mages it's usually better to focus on offenses and utility because the only two attributes they want are magic and willpower. Now that you know what Anders generally likes on his equipment, here are the items I personally recommend. For weapons, there are a bunch of great staves in Awakening, but I'll only recommend 3 which I think are particularly nice. Charlatan's Walking Stick is a tier 7 physical staff with +5 willpower, +1 combat mana regen, and +7 spell power. You can buy this from Uriah in the Throne Room of Vigil's Keep for 13 gold and a half if you upgrade him once. You just need to save the merchant during the first mission. It's a great little upgrade for Anders' starting staff, and it's fairly cheap. Spell Fury is a tier 9 physical staff that grants +4 to all attributes, +1 combat mana regen, a huge +20 spell power, and it also has a -0.4 second rapid aim bonus. You can buy this from Octham the Grocer in Amaranthine for 172 gold and a half. It's extremely expensive, but absolutely worth it for any mage in your party due to that huge bonus to spell power and all attributes. It's great as well that it's a physical damage staff, so you don't have to worry about enemies' elemental resistances or immunities. But if you don't want to spend so much money on a staff, there's one final amazing option. Staff of the Lost is a tier 9 physical staff that grants +10 magic, +15% spirit resistance, +15 spell power, +75 stamina, aka mana, and +50% spirit damage. You can loot this from the Lost in the Kalkharal lower reaches during the main quest when you recruit Sigrun. This is the best staff in Awakening, unless you need mana regen, because it has even more spell power than Spell Fury, and more importantly, it's free. So this is my personal top pick. You'll notice it's also a physical damage staff like the other two, so you don't need to worry at all about enemy elemental resistances or immunities. Plus, your spells that deal spirit damage, Arcane Bolt, Walking Bomb, and Drain Life, will be increased due to the +50% spirit damage bonus, which is the maximum you can reach in Awakening. Moving on to armor, you will want a robe for the chest slot, something with a lot of spell power. There's only 2 options in Awakening that you can get early, a DLC robe and one from the Black Marsh main quest. Anders' starting robes are fine, but the 2 robes I recommend are a definite improvement. Vestments of the Seer grant +10 willpower, +7 magic, +10 armor, and +10% spell resistance. This is an item you can unlock by completing the Witch Hunt DLC, and after that you'll have it in your inventory from the beginning of the game. These are my favorite robes because +10 willpower means +50 mana, and you get 7 spell power from the magic. Spellminder grants +8 magic, +1 combat mana regen, and +8 armor. You can obtain these by defeating the Queen of the Black Marsh during the main quest when you recruit Justice. They're great robes, but you don't get any extra mana from them, so I personally prefer the Vestments of the Seer. For helmets, there's only 2 good ones, and unfortunately there aren't any extras from Origins to recommend either. First, Enchanter's Cowl is a mage cloth helm that grants +4 magic and +25 stamina, aka mana. You can find it in a locked chest in the Architect's Room during the Righteous Path main quest in the Silverite Mines. You can only open the chest with a key by persuading Sarani to help you, so make sure your warden has Master Coercion for that. It could also drop randomly from the Apostate Mage during the Out of Control side quest in Amaranthine, but since that's a rare drop, it doesn't really matter. Toque of the Oblivious is a mage cloth helm that grants +10 magic, +5 armor, +10% spell resistance, and +10 mental and physical resistance. You can loot this from the Queen of the Black Marsh after defeating her, and it's by far the best mage helmet due to that huge +10 magic bonus. For gloves, here are the ones I recommend. Shock Treatment are tier 8 mage gloves that grant +10% electricity resistance and +20% electricity damage. You can loot these from the Dragon Thrall in the Silverite Mine during the Righteous Path. These are good if you want to increase the damage of your lightning spells if you're planning on using them fairly often, at least lightning and chain lightning. Storm Talons are tier 6 mage gloves that grant plus 20% electricity damage. You can buy them from Octham the Grocer in Amaranthine for 6 gold. If you want to get electricity damage gloves for Anders before completing the Righteous Path, then these are fine since they grant the same damage bonus as shock treatment, but you will have to spend some gold on them, so only do it if you really want the early electricity damage. Black Hand Gauntlets are tier 6 mage gloves that grant plus 20% spirit damage. You can also buy these from Octham the Grocer in Amaranthine for 6 gold. Personally, I wouldn't focus on increasing spirit damage, especially since if you use Staff of the Lost, you'll already be at the maximum plus 50%. Ashen Gloves are tier 6 mage gloves that grant plus 20% cold damage. You can also buy these from Octham in Amaranthine for 6 gold. While increasing cold damage isn't necessary, since cold spells are already high value due to the freeze effects, you will likely use them often, so increasing cold damage is a good choice, especially if your spirit damage is already taken care of with Staff of the Lost, and maybe you don't care that much about the electricity spells. There are a couple of mage gloves that grant plus 30% damage to 2 elements, but they're very expensive and not worth it since only one of the elements would be relevant. Totally fine to get plus 20% to an element from gloves, plus additional bonuses from Elemental Mastery and other items. It's fairly easy to get to the plus 50% maximum if your build only uses 2 to 3 elements. Finally, there's literally only one pair of boots that are better than Anders' starting ones because boots mages can equip only offer defensive bonuses. So you can keep Anders' starting boots without issue for the whole game. Fadewalker is a tier 9 pair of mage boots with plus 5 willpower, plus 15 defense, and plus 15 spirit resistance. You can loot these from a bone pile in the Dragonbone Wastes during the final main quest, so you'll only be able to use them for a little bit. They're a nice little upgrade due to more defense and a bit more mana from the willpower, so equip them during the final main quest after you loot them since you might as well. But yeah, unfortunately there's nothing else I can recommend here. Mage boots are just a lost cause, at least when it comes to non-blood mages, so don't worry about it. Moving on to accessories. There are 4 good belts. Lucrosian's Silken Cord grants plus 2 magic and plus 4 constitution, and you can loot it from a locked chest in the courtyard of Vigil's Keep during the first mission when you save Vigil's Keep from the Darkspawn attack. It's a great free belt to replace Anders' bad starting one early, but I recommend getting a better belt later. Battle Mage's Cinch grants plus 5 willpower and plus 5 spell power, and you can loot it from the Corpse of the Lost in the Kalharal lower reaches during the main quest when you recruit Sigrun. Sash of Forbidden Secrets grants plus 6 willpower, plus 6 spell power, plus 15 mental resistance, and it improves blood magic, aka spells cost 25% less health. You can obtain this by killing the Harvester on any difficulty in the Golems of Amgarak DLC, and then you'll have it available from the beginning of the game. This is essentially the best mage belt, though there is one that is slightly better if you don't care about blood magic. The belt in question is Belt of the Architect, which grants plus 7 willpower and plus 7 spell power, but unfortunately you can only obtain this if you side against the Architect and kill him before the final main quest, so the other belts are overall more useful since you can use them for most of the game. When it comes to amulets, there aren't a lot of good ones. Scout's Medal grants plus 2 dexterity, plus 10 constitution, plus 2 armor, and plus 50 stamina. Generally, I'd give this to a tank, but if your tank has another amulet they want, then this is great for that juicy plus 50 stamina, aka mana. You can buy this from Uriah in the Throne Room of Vigil's Keep for a bit over 84 gold. This is great for many characters, so it's absolutely worth buying. If you don't want the 50 mana from Scout's Medal, then any amulets with bonuses to all attributes will work. Illumination grants plus 3 to all attributes and plus 10 mental resistance, and you can obtain this by doing the Wending Woodstone puzzle. Pearl of the Anointed grants plus 2 to all attributes and increased monetary gain. It's a DLC item you should have in your inventory from the beginning of the game. Finally, Seeker's Chain grants plus 2 to all attributes, plus 1 combat health regen, and plus 3 defense. You can buy it from Glassrick the Weaponsmith and Amaranthine for 10 gold and a half. I'd keep this one for a character who can make use of that health regen and just use Illumination or Pearl of the Anointed on Anders instead, but I figured I'd mention this one too. For rings, there are 3 very nice ones. Golden Cog grants plus 4 willpower and plus 4 magic, and can be bought from Uriah in the Throne Room of Vigil's Keep for a bit over 6 gold. These are the main bonuses you want, so it's a great early game ring for either Anders or Valana. Ring of Discipline grants plus 15 willpower and can be looted from a locked chest in the Architect's Room in the Silverite Mines if you persuade Sarani to help you with Master Coercion. Plus 15 willpower means a huge plus 75 mana bonus. Interestingly enough, this is also part of an item set with another ring, the Ring of Mastery, and if you equip both, you'll get a bonus of plus 12 Constitution. Not the best bonus for a long-range non-blood mage though, so you don't necessarily have to equip both rings, though they are both amazing, so you may end up doing it anyway. Speaking of, Ring of Mastery grants plus 10 spell power and can be looted from Adria during the quest Adria's Plight in the basement of Vigil's Keep when you go clear out the Darkspawn from the basement. This is one of the highest spell power bonuses you can get other than the 2 high spell power staves, and it's super easy to get this early by going to the basement after the first mission. Unfortunately, Anders won't be able to use any runes since he wields a staff and wears robes, which don't have any rune slots. And other than using lyrium potions to restore mana and potentially using a health poultice here and there, there's nothing to talk about in terms of consumables either. So let's discuss tactics and party composition. In terms of party composition, I always recommend having one tank in the party and at least one ranged character, whether archer or mage. By tank, I mean a warrior who can use Threaten and Taunt, and in Awakening Grievous Insult, for the purpose of keeping enemies attacking them instead of their squishier party members. You could get away with an Arcane Warrior tank as long as they're doing a lot of damage and drawing a lot of threat with spells like Draining Aura and Miasma. I recommend 1 or 2 ranged characters because you can start damaging enemies that are far away earlier. But also, if you have 3 or especially 4 melee characters in the party, they will get stuck in doorways and cramped areas when fighting, and that will cause them to take more damage and be in awkward positions as they try to get unstuck. So have at least 1 ranged character, if not 2, to avoid these terrible positioning problems. Anders has the role of mage and ranged damager to some extent, since he will be dealing a decent amount of damage, though his main purpose is to heal and buff your allies, and disable enemies with freeze, stun, and paralyze effects. You can absolutely have a second mage in the party in addition to Anders, maybe even a third mage if your warden is one, because mages are extremely powerful and fun to play with. But I recommend using more damage-focused builds for your other mage or mages, since you will need more damage on the team. That's all the advice I have for party compositions though, because first and foremost, it's important to choose the party that you feel comfortable playing, and which includes the companions you like. So my recommendations are just suggestions based on my experience and my playstyle preferences. For Anders' tactics, you will need quite a few tactic slots, so that's why I recommended putting points into the combat tactics skill. If you aren't controlling Anders manually, you need the tactic slots to ensure he can use all his good spells at the right moment. First, the most important sustained spell to have active is Haste, because it buffs the movement and attack speed of your party. So set that up in your tactics as Self, Any, Activate Haste. The second sustained spell you could have active if you want is Frost Weapons. It's optional since it won't add a lot of extra damage, but if you can spare the 40 mana and 5% fatigue, set it up in the same way as Haste. The final sustained spell you can keep active is Elemental Mastery. It will give you a bonus of plus 15% to all the different elemental damage types. You only care about electricity, cold, and spirit damage though, and you may already have pretty big bonuses to these from gear that get you close or at the maximum plus 50% cap for each element. In that case, there's no need to take away 100 mana just to keep this sustained, but if you do want it, then set it up the same way as Haste and Frost Weapons. Draining Aura is another optional spell to keep sustained, since it could deal spirit damage to nearby enemies, but I would say keep it out of your tactics and only turn it on manually if you make Anders get close to enemies to use disabling spells like Cone of Cold, Hand of Winter, or Mind Blast. Now we get to the healing spells. The most effective tactics I've found for them are these. For heal, cast it on an ally when they are under 50% HP or 60% if you're playing on hard or nightmare. So in tactics, that's ally, health, under 50 or 60%, use heal. For group heal, ally, health, under 30%, use group heal. If an ally's health is under 30%, it's likely that other party members are also damaged, and more importantly, it means heal is on cooldown, so group heal should be used to keep them alive. As for the revival spell, you should use it manually if one or more party members get knocked unconscious. If there are multiple unconscious party members close to each other, you can aim the spell's area to revive all of them at the same time. No need to waste a tactics slot on this though, since it's an unlikely occurrence. If you have a melee character in your party who uses a lot of stamina due to using activated abilities a lot, or who has their stamina drained by a sustained that has a regeneration penalty, then set up a special tactic to use the Rejuvenate spell when that particular ally's stamina is low. You'll have to set this up for one specific party member, so let's pick Sigrun for this example. Choose Sigrun, under 50 or 60% stamina, use Rejuvenate. The cooldown of Rejuvenate is pretty high, 45 seconds, so that's why I recommend already using it when the ally's stamina is at 50 to 60%, since it will be a while until you can cast it again. But as I mentioned in the recommended abilities section, this spell is optional, only useful if you have a character in the party who can really benefit from this. Heroic Defense should only be used on a tanky character, either a dedicated tank warrior or an arcane warrior tank, or maybe a tanky rogue if you're using a funky team composition. This increases the allies' defense and elemental resistances, but they also get a fatigue penalty, so only use it when absolutely necessary. You can set it up to be used if they're being attacked by a mage, so party member X, let's say Justice, being attacked by type of attack, magic, use Heroic Defense. And you can have an additional tactic for when the character is surrounded by 3 or more enemies for the defense bonus. There may be certain boss fights during which the boss enemy deals elemental damage but isn't a mage, like the Inferno Golem from Kal Haral. But that's an exception that can't be covered by tactics, so you'll have to use it manually then. To heal Anders when his health gets low, the best spell to do this with is Drain Life, since you want to keep heal and group heal for your other allies. So set it up as self, health, under 60 or 70%, use Drain Life. Now we can talk about the offensive and utility spells and how to use them. Winter's Grasp should have 2 tactics, the first to be used on an enemy using magic attacks, because enemy spellcasters are most likely to fail the resistance check and get frozen. The second tactic under this can be to use this on the enemy with the highest health, since disabling effects have more value on enemies that aren't that close to dying. But make sure this highest health tactic is under the spellcaster one, since disabling spellcasters takes precedence. Lightning should be used on an enemy using melee or ranged attacks, since they are likely not mages, so the electricity damage will also drain some of their stamina. I don't recommend adding Arcane Bolt to your tactics because you'll already be dealing plenty of damage with Winter's Grasp, Lightning, Drain Life whenever Anders needs to heal himself, and good AoE spells. But if you want to, you could set it up similarly to the second tactic of Winter's Grasp, which is to use it on the highest health enemy. It's a cheap spell and it has a very short cooldown, but that means Anders may use it a bit too often and end up not having enough mana for his higher value spells. Paralyze should be used on elite rank or higher enemies, so set it up as enemy, rank, elite or higher, use Paralyze. Lots of bosses tend to be immune to stuns and knockdowns, but not paralysis effects, so Paralyze is always great since they could fail the resistance check and become much easier to deal with. I don't recommend adding Shock and Cone of Cold to your tactics because they are hard to use effectively by a companion's AI and will usually result in you damaging your own party members and even freezing them with Cone of Cold. So use these cone spells manually when you find yourself in a good position with them, like if you have a bunch of enemies stuck in a tunnel or arranged in a line. Hand of Winter should be used when Anders is surrounded by 2 or more enemies, since it will both damage and freeze them. Additionally, you can add the same tactic for Mind Blast, but since that one only stuns, it would only be there in case Hand of Winter is on cooldown, or as an earlier tactic before you unlock Hand of Winter. For Blizzard and Chain Lightning, set these AoE damaging spells to be used when an enemy is clustered together with at least 3 allies. I don't recommend Tempest because your allies will get damaged by it as well and have their stamina drained. Chain Lightning is way better because it only targets enemies. You can also optionally use Walking Bomb on an enemy that is clustered with at least 3 allies. I'd set this up under the Blizzard tactic so that there's a high chance Anders already cast Blizzard on them, and at least some of the enemies are frozen, so the explosion from Walking Bomb will affect more of them. Last but certainly not least, you should ensure that if Anders' mana gets too low, he will drink a Lyrium Potion. He might get some mana back from regen bonuses or from the Battle Mage's Stoic passive, but you can't rely on that to always be the case. So set the Lyrium Potion tactics like this: self, mana or stamina, under 40%, use Lyrium Potion, least powerful. You could also choose to use a certain type of Lyrium Potions if you know you have a lot of them, but for me this is the easiest way to ensure the mage will always drink a Lyrium Potion as long as you have one, no matter its quality. This is pretty much it. I wouldn't add a tactic for Anders to use health poultices when low on health because he already gets healed by the group heal spell and drain life, so his health should be just fine. I went into a lot of detail about how to use all of these different spells for Anders, but if you want to remove some of the damaging ones and mostly focus on the support and disabling spells, then you can absolutely do that. Walking Bomb doesn't need to be used. The cone spells I already said I recommend against adding to his tactics. You could also remove Arcane Bolt, Lightning, and Chain Lightning if you don't care about dealing damage at all, but I'd recommend keeping at least Chain Lightning because it deals so much damage and it will only be used when there's a high enough number of enemies clustered together to be worth it. In any case, I hope my explanations for how to set up the tactics of a support hybrid mage like Anders were helpful. I know mages can be a bit difficult to set up due to the variety of their spell effects. In conclusion, Anders is a great support mage already from the moment you recruit him, but you can add even more support and utility to his build by investing in the creation tree, and of course more damage and enemy disabling spells to round out his capabilities. What I like best about these classic mages, aka not arcane warriors or blood mages, is that they don't need super high tier or expensive equipment to be good. You can just have a mediocre staff and mediocre robes and other items because spells have such high value. You only need mana to cast them with, which you can just get with Lyrium Potions. So mages like Anders are cheap to build while adding a ton of power and utility to your team. Anyway, I hope you found this build guide for Anders in Dragon Age Origins Awakening useful. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future guides and other videos I plan to make about Awakening, Dragon Age in general, and other games I care about. At this moment, most of my attention is on Awakening guides, but a lot more stuff is coming later on. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.